Volkswagen is one of the largest automotive manufacturers of some of its models, like the Beetle, Golf, or the Transporter minivan, getting cult followings. Many people follow the brand almost religiously, and therefore every new model that comes from Wolfsburg is met with a lot of excitement. On the flip side, every new model is a challenge, and more has to be refined in the best possible way so that the reputation of the people's car can be preserved. Exterior, interior, storage and practicalities, and also not to be approval about tech features, ride comfort, cabin noise, acceleration and braking, consumption, charging speed, competition, verdict. And today we are testing one of Volkswagen's newest additions, the ID.4 GTX. It is an electric crossover on the MEB platform, which many vehicles from the Volkswagen Group use. The GTX is the sportiest and most powerful variant, which comes with 250 kilowatts, 340 horsepower, and standard all-wheel drive. This should combine for a fun, yet practical vehicle with funky styling and big cabin space, all in a compact package of less than 4.6 meters in length. It should be noted that the ID.4 is due to a facelift for the 2024 model year. Our test car is actually a hybrid between the two generations, and has the facelift look from the outside, but the pre-facelift, infotainment and drivetrain. In a world dominated by crossovers, we will show you how the ID.4 GTX stacks up against the ruthless competition. Could it be the next Golf and amass the same success? We are setting off to see how the ID.4 GTX performs in our test and tell you everything you need to know about the model. Dimensions at 4,584 millimeters times 1,852 millimeters times 1,640 millimeters, 2,771 millimeter wheelbase, drivetrain tested GTX, WW 250 kilowatt, 340 horsepower, 679 newton meter, 77 kilowatt hour usable battery capacity, 82 kilowatt hour total battery capacity. Other drivetrains: Pro RWD 210 kilowatts, 586 horsepower, 545 newton meters, 77 kilowatts power usable battery capacity, 82 kilowatts power total battery. As charging, 175 kilowatts CCS, 5 to 80% in 38 minutes, for range 515 kilometers WLTP, weight 2,256 kilograms unladen, 2,770 kilograms gross. Other features: sport seats, automatic high beams, OTA updates, augmented reality head-up. And then the outside of the ID.4 is modern looking with flowing lines and almost no edges. Everything in the exterior is smoothed out both for style and aerodynamic purposes. Volkswagen make the ID.4 look more like a hatchback than the crossover it actually is, with its body-colored lower trims, which most models overlay with black plastic for a more rugged look. From the front, the ID.4 welcomes you with a rounded shape and a grumpy look that we really like. It looks aggressive and stately without being too much in your face cover type of design. The hood is low and has two big bulges on each side that enhance the presence on the road. And the Volkswagen logo sits high off the ground and is surrounded by LED strips on both sides for a more menacing profile at night, but we feel it gives some off the cheap aftermarket look rather than the futuristic, aggressive one VW is going for. And looking at the ID.4 GTX from the side, it can be easily mistaken for a hatchback. Doesn't have black plastics on the lower side of the car as opposed to the regular ID.4 models. This way it has a cleaner look, and it helps distinguish it from its tamer siblings. The wheels on our test vehicle are the standard 20-inch alloys, but you can also opt for bigger 21-inch ones. They both look great, but the smaller set offers very slightly higher range and a better ride quality. Our vehicle had a staggered setup of Pirelli Scorpion Elect 235 4520 in the front,
and 255/45/20 in the back. These tires are optimized for better range in EVs rather than absolute grip.
And the silhouette of the ID.4 creates an illusion that the roof is floating as it's painted black, together with the side pillars. And this makes the ID.4 GTX appear lower and slanted, which is actually not the case, as the car is 1,640 millimeter tall and has a ground clearance of 170 millimeter. The regular ID.4 gets 210, and then clearance offers even better fit for those that want to tackle more challenging surfaces. Volkswagen has hopped on the current industry trend of flush door handles and has aced it in terms of design and practicality. There's a slight opening in the door where you stick your fingers to push a button and open. This way the design remains modern and sleek, but there is no need to wait for electric motors to pop the handle out and having to deal with them freezing in the winter. Most modern cars have a graphic, or at least a light to illuminate the vicinity of the vehicle when you unlock it, so that you better see what you're stepping on. One of Volkswagen has decided to integrate a weird angular graphic that looks like a Renault logo, which you see every time you approach a vehicle at night. And the nameplate GTX can be found on the front end of the front doors in a minimalistic script. In the pre-facelift version, every ID.4 has a chrome badge to signify its trim level, whereas now only the GTX comes with model designation on the side. Stepping back and looking at the rear of the ID.4 GTX, you see a giant LED bar spreading from end to end, containing the rear and brake lights. Having a cool pixelated design helps distinguish them from all the other vehicles with a rear LED bar that came out recently. The VW emblem sits in the center of the hatch, accompanied by a GTX signature right below it to let everyone know that you had the most potent version in the existence. The lower part of the rear is cluttered with black plastic that mimics vents and a diffuser, but all it does is disturb the otherwise very clean exterior of the ID.4 GTX. And inside the ID.4 GTX is a roomy cabin with solid build quality. The general layout is easy to understand without too many futuristic touches and overcomplicated elements. The material used could have been better, yet they are put together excellently, and nothing rattles or squeak, with the exception of the center screen. And the pedals are the thing you immediately notice when you open the door of the ID.4 GTX. They are chromed with rubber inlets, and the brake pedal has a pause icon, while the accelerator has the play go symbol. These definitely brought a smile to our faces. Next up are the seats. They look fabulous and are awesome to sit in. They hug your body well with their big bolsters, while the Alcantara prevents you from their sliding around. They are not only sporty, but they also provide great comfort and no tire you on longer road trips. Optionally, you also can get seat heating, even seat massage, which enhance travel comfort even further. The GTX seats are a huge upgrade, and they make the experience behind the wheel that much more enjoyable. The steering wheel features some great and not so great touches. It is nice and small with a solid feel and optional heating function. Can also control the multimedia and feel the driver assistance. Yet Volkswagen went with one of the worst ways possible to go about those controls. The buttons have haptic feedback and are not actually buttons, which is a recurring theme in the ID.4. This means they're next to impossible to use while driving, turning what should be a very simple process into burdening chore. Behind the steering wheel is the tiny gauge cluster display, which shows only the most necessary information without any cool options and no fancy graphics like many other manufacturers currently do. It shows information about assisted driving the navigation, and a speedometer, and that is about it. And while the gauge cluster is highly basic, the optional head-up display unit is anything but. It projects a huge image on the windshield, providing you with all kinds of information. It can add augmented reality to your navigation so that you never miss your turn, as well as showing you the lane you are driving on, including the trajectory of the car in front of you. It is truly a phenomenal HUD implementation and an important box to tick when you spec your ID.4 GTX. Moving on to the center display, which comes in 10-inch version for the lower trims and 12 inches in the GTX variant. We got the touchscreen response times are behind the times, which is also the reason why Volkswagen is updating the whole infotainment system for the facelift version, since just about everyone that tried the current ones hated it. We are very eager to test the revamped version, and we'll get back to you once we get the chance. Below the infotainment screen is probably the most offensive part of the whole car, which sadly won't be addressed and the facelift was talking about, the unlit slider that controls multiple features.
You slide your finger on the piano black surface to adjust the temperature inside or control the volume of the radio, which is a poor way to operate these in the first place, as it's too distracting. Not to mention harder and slower than a traditional dial.
But the most significant problem is that this bar remains unlit at night, which makes it virtually unusable, especially if you don't know the car too well. It is so cool, but the car has ambient lighting, which can even show 2 different colors at once. But we would certainly trade a little bit of ambient lighting for backlift, volume, and temperature controls. The center console, on the other hand, is more fitting for Volkswagen famed usability and user-friendly design. There are 2 giant cup holders with 2 card slots that are constantly open, while a plastic lid hides 2 more adjustable cup holders, 2 USB-C ports, and a wireless charging tray. And weirdly enough, the ID.4 doesn't have a traditional armrest. It rather adapts a feature for minivans with individual fin armrests for each passenger. They look bad and degrade the premium feeling inside the ID.4 and are probably there just for cost-cutting measures, which is a shame. The doors are fairly simple, with the materials in front are significantly better than the ones in back. The driver's door has controls for the mirrors and rear windows, as in most vehicles, yet here Volkswagen again made the mistake of overcomplicating a process that should be simple. The same knob controls the movement, folding, and defrosting, which ultimately leads to you never knowing which feature you're currently operating. You also only get 2 window rockers, which means you have to use a separate rubbery button with no feed net to select that you want to control the rear ones, and only then can you operate them. Between the steering wheel and the door panel is a headlight and window defrost unit. The idea of incorporating these features together in that place is ridiculous, but even more so is the use of more rubbery buttons with no feedback. At the back we find plenty of headroom and legroom. Even our 195 meters tall Revere fits well with generous amounts of space left if you plan on riding with many people for longer trips or have child seats. The ID.4 might be among the best choices you can make. You also get very nice optional features like USB-C outlets and climate controls with multiple vents for optimized comfort in the back. These are extras. Not so many vehicles weighted train this vehicle in the segment offer and make the ID.4 GTX stand out. Storage-wise, the ID.4 GTX has a lot to offer. It has boxy trunk, allowing you to fully utilize its cargo potential, as well as 2 big storage areas below the main trunk floor. The rear seats fold fully flat cargo floor, opening a huge storage area with a lot of usable space. There's also a 12-volt outlet and optional towing hitch. Overall, the ID.4 proves very practical and Even though it doesn't have a front trunk, it still offers a lot of storage space with clever pockets both inside the cabin and in the trunk. And the feeling of driving the ID.4 GTX is rewarding and fun, especially for a crossover. Due to its significant weight of 2,256 kilograms, even unlading, it stays like this 6 times and exudes confidence in corners. The steering, the GTX features stiffer suspension than the regular ID.4 models. Optionally, you can get adjustable suspension for the different driving modes, but we got the fixed sports suspension, which was definitely felt negatively daily driving, but was great fun on twisty roads and very stable on the highway. And there's nothing to do is that and make there are some big other animal he's so. This is also the modes. It is not able to call any pedals, especially as the ID.4 GTX won't come to a full stop on its own and requires you to press the brake pedal for that. You don't get much feedback from the road, yet you see very well in front of you. And the augmented reality head-up display we mentioned previously helps you predict precisely how you should take the next corner. The ID.4 GTX isn't quite as agile as the reality versions, and it needs a little bit more space for tight maneuvers. The ID.4 also comfortably goes on light off-roading. Its approach and departure angles are great, and its wheelbase makes it a good companion for some dirt adventures. The ID.4 wasn't a technological leader in 2020 when it first debuted, and the situation remains the same 3 years later. It doesn't have some groundbreaking features like Tesla's Miller Autopilot, for example, but the ID.4 feels more traditional and refined. It has proven technologies that have worked in previous models and are now only being refined and optimized. And the most significant downside is the infotainment, which is unnecessarily complicated and not very responsive either. It has serious input lag as well as some menus that don't always work. The fact that Volkswagen was forced to rush out a facelift with the sole intent of addressing complaints about the infotainment tells you just about everything you need to know about the terrain. But despite its faults, the central screen has a lot of features, provides connected services and shows all kinds of vehicle data. Sadly, the climate controls are also integrated in the screen and require multiple touches to operate. On a much more positive side, Volkswagen has integrated a great head-up display unit with big readouts, augmented reality, and multiple customization options. It makes up greatly for the small gauge cluster with limited usage and outdated design. Volkswagen released an update in mid-2022 and included auto hold feature and bidirectional charging. The latter one is very interesting as you'll be able to use it for only 4,000 hours and up to 10,000 kilowatt hours for the entire life of the vehicle, which is a really bizarre limitation and may affect the future prices of used vehicles, especially the ones that have used up the majority of their running tire hours. As we mentioned previously, our test model came with standard sports suspension that is stiffer than the adaptive one. It still filters small uneven surfaces and blocks out most of the jiggles when driving on pavement. It is not too harsh to be unusable for daily use while also allowing you to enjoy a fun ride on some mountain roads. The cabin of the ID.4 is very well insulated and at low speeds is truly a calm place. The fact it does than some much more expensive and premium models in our test speaks a lot about the attention to detail in the ID.4. 60 kilometers per hour, 90 kilometers per hour, 130 kilometers an hour. Accelerating in the GTX is not as thrilling as the name might suggest, but still pretty solid by any standard. With a time for 0 to 100 kilometers an hour of 557s, the ID.4 is not a drag strip monster, but does fairly well for such a heavy vehicle. Strangely, what is meant to be the sportiest version of the lineup 10 has its top speed limited to just 180 kilometers per hour. And stopping the ID.4 GTX from 100 kilometers an hour takes 37 a meter, which is an average figure for the test. The commendable part is that the ID.4 GTX is consistent with its results and did the same length in 4 consecutive stops. This means that the brakes are reliable and you can count on them in all cases. Even though the ID.4 GTX has smooth body lines for optimized airflow, it shows signs of aging, and some newer models are much better in terms of efficiency. The WLTP rating of 515 kilometers of range is manageable with very careful driving. Our testing was conducted in near perfect conditions as the ambient temperature was 17 degrees, 60 kilometers per hour, 90 kilometers per hour, 130 kilometers an hour. That wouldn't officially claim the ID.4 GTX can charge at up to 175 kilowatts.
During our testing, we did everything as recommended and preheated the battery, drove the car for a while, and still couldn't quite reach that value, peaking at 156 kilowatts.
More disappointingly, once we reached 39% of charge, the charging rate dropped significantly, and the car could only charge at 76 kilowatts, which makes the process of charging much more slower than it could have been. In some ideal situations, you should be able to reach the optimal values as shown in the fasten graph below, but don't combat with all that being the norm. The Volkswagen ID.4 GTX enters a tightly contested segment that continues welcoming new competitors every week these days. The VW is priced somewhere in the middle of it when it comes to pricing and just about every important performance aspect. It never topped any charts, nor did it flop dramatically anywhere. One could say this has been Volkswagen's all formula for success for many years, and it's no wonder the company stuck with it. The first and most significant competitor of the ID.4 GTX is the similarly priced Tesla Model Y LR. It is a bit bigger in size and has more modern for technologies, yet the ID.4 is better suited for smaller and densely populated cities with its great cabin. The Volkswagen has better interior materials and build quality, but the Tesla is more efficient, allowing you better range from a smaller body. The second rival comes from Volkswagen's own stable and is actually the same vehicle rebranded as the Skoda Enyaq RS. Both vehicles share their powertrain and sit atop the same platform. The Skoda has a simpler interior, more storage space, and a better infotainment system. And even though Skoda lacks the brand image of Volkswagen, the Enyaq actually costs more. The Volkswagen ID.4 GTX is a great all-around vehicle. Giving its owner just enough of everything, it is a highly practical vehicle, which is also great fun to drive. It has enough power to zoom through traffic without being a track car. It is a vehicle that accompanies you in your daily routines and offers perfect usability in all kinds of situations. The ID.4 is primarily held back by its infotainment system and unnecessary, complicated controls, most of which will be addressed in the upcoming facelift. If you are willing to live with those, the ID.4 GTX will make a fine companion that will make the boring daily activities that little bit more pleasant, and stable and fun to drive. Sporty but comfortable seats, plenty of interior space, big trunk with foldable seats, and many additional pockets. Distinctive styling with fine proportions, easy and predictable to drive. The infotainment system is laggy and unintuitive, lack of one-pedal driving. Key controls lack backlighting and are hard to operate in the dark. High weight for the class.